Hi, I'm Philip, the owner of Ivercy, the source code control add-in for Microsoft Access. And today I would like to show you a couple of new features we implemented in the new Ivercy version 1.3.14. And this is a version that is available now. Let's look at the Ivercy download site here, and you need to scroll down a bit because it's still in beta, but if we go down here, then you see this is the version. It is available for download now. Okay, let's look at the new features. There are 3 of them. The first one is really simple. It's a new filter status value for new and modified files in the repository. Then you have the option to exclude objects like forms or queries from Ivercy version control inside your database. And the third one is the biggest new feature. It's custom commands. And we're going to look at them one by one. The first 2 are probably pretty quick. So the new status filter. If you would use the get latest version command, and you want to get the stuff that someone else on your team modified recently or added to the repository, you would do 2 things. You would go to the out of date status and then select all, click OK. And the next thing, you would check new in repository and do the same again, select all, OK, and then you are up to date locally. And now we just added this new filter status here. It's new or updated in the repository, and once I select this, I see all the stuff that's new in there, and I can just select all, hit OK, and get all that in one go, and just save a little bit of time and prevent that I forget to get stuff from the repository. Very simple, but I think it's very useful. The next thing is exclude objects from version control. And that is particularly directed to some temporary objects. It's with our project mostly queries, but it works with any object. I just create a new query here and some really simple stuff like foo as bar. And this is a query that will be maintained by your program, like a pass-through query to SQL Server or a query to import data or whatever. It is updated by code all the time, so it makes no sense to put that into version control because your program will create the query and modify it all the time. And if you have such objects now in your version control database, they tend to get in the way. Because I'm just going to save that as my temp query here. Because when I say I want to add objects, then here is my temp query, and I don't want to add that because it makes no sense. And that is always there. Even if I add it, then I will constantly be notified that it changed. It will be inside the out-of-date object list on the local changes. It just gets into the way. And to prevent that, we created a new feature to exclude objects. It's here in the SCC workflow settings. And here it is, excluded objects. And I hit the small button and say add, and then I've got this dialog to add objects, and I paste in the name of my query here, and I also need to select the object type, and there are all the object types that Ivercy can manage, and query is just fine. So I just go back and save, and you see now it has the green plus for the new object. That is as it always was. And now I just refresh the status, and you see here the icon changed to that kind of excluded, prohibited sign. And if I now say I add objects to Team Foundation server, it will not be listed here anymore. So it's still in the local database, but Ivercy will never ask you to add it to the repository. Now, the biggest feature, the biggest new feature in here is custom commands. Maybe you just noticed the new ribbon icon. It's disabled at the moment, but we will change that. And I go to the global options because custom commands are global so that you can use them in all of your projects. And just to show you how they work, I just add a very, very basic custom command in here. Let's say the command is Notepad and the argument is just this file name here. The ID is just a unique identity of the command. You don't need to bother with that. Ivercy puts in a default value in there, and that's usually unique, and you don't need to pay attention. Name is obviously pretty important. So I name this command Open Notepad, and I can also add an ribbon image MSO. That is the Office image MSOs, the kind of names of the commands in the ribbon, and you can use them to refer to icons of commands. So I say OK and save this, and you notice the custom commands here has become active. And if I just say Open Notepad, it opens Notepad with the file name I added as an argument. That is obviously very, very basic. The interesting part here is that you can also use a couple of variables related to your Access project and particularly to version control. So I'm going to add another custom command in here, like a script, for example. Let's call that build release, or maybe rather start build. And the command is basically environment comspec. That is the Ivercy variable syntax for those custom commands. I will put in a link to the full documentation in the description, but just in short, this refers to the Windows environment, and comspec is just an environment variable, and you can use any environment variable here. But there are lots of other areas of variables. We'll look at a couple of them in a second. So as command argument, I'm going to paste in this, and I kind of move this and draw the screen a little bit larger so that you can see this. And now here are also some other variables. SCC local is the local part of your source code control project, and the path is the directory. So we pass in that, and this repository is another area of variables, and the user is just the username you use to log into the repository. And the final thing in here is an input type of variable, and that is not predefined, but it will pop up an input box. We'll see that in a minute. So what this does, it just runs a cmd-exe, the command line, and then it changes the directory to the local path and then runs the batch file start build. And that could be a build script or whatever script you would like to execute. And to make this look a little bit prettier, I add also an image MSO, but the image is of course totally optional. But just to show it, I leave it out, save it, and now we've got here the start build command without an icon, and I run this, and now Ivercy asks me for the input for that variable, and you can define any variable name. I just named it enter repository password, And that is a bit of a problem because for most variables you don't care if anyone sees what you enter, but for a password that's not ideal. So I'm not going to enter my real password, but this, just that you can see what happens, and I confirm this with OK, and here I've got to move it here. This started the command line, and this was not a real build script because that would take some time, but it you see here, this is actually my username for my demo repository I use here. And that was pulled from the environment variables, and here is what I entered for a password. So you can run any command. And to wrap things up, I would like to show you one thing, basically the one command that we had in mind when building this originally. So I'm going to add another custom command here. And we are going to need a little bit more space probably. Hope this will be enough. So I will run the Edge browser in here. That is just the path to the Microsoft Edge browser. And then I put in this command line. It just fits in here. And here's a variable, it's the repository path, and item refers to the second item of the path that happens to be the repository name in Team Foundation Server. Then we add the full repository path here. And finally, this selected object refers to the object that is selected in the navigation pane in Access. And of course, we want the file name of that object. So I call this show blame TFS, and I add a small icon in here. And now I say OK and save the configuration. And what I can do now, I select here down at the left an object. And now I say show blame TFS, and this will open the repository. That is, the repository is on Azure DevOps, and it will show the Annotate page. And that is, this kind of view is called blame in Subversion, in SourceGear Vault, and I think in Git also, but in Team Foundation Server it's called Annotate. But these are basically the same features and they work very similarly in all systems. So it opens the Annotate page here. And the interesting bit is I see the person and the date and the internal version number of all this source code here. And if I scroll down, this was all checked in by me on that date. And I hope here you see this is the internal version. If I hover over that, I see the check-in comment. I see who was it and when. And this refers to this single line here that has been added 3 hours ago. And if you select another file in the navigation pane and I run the command again, then I will see the Annotate view for that file. And maybe that is a little bit more interesting here. Lots of changes on the left where you see what was changed, and you all can always see this single line was added at this date, and the check-in comment was alignment of subform. So this gives you a lot of information about your file. You can basically see for every line that is in your file now, who wrote it, when did they write it, and why, at least if they entered a meaningful check-in comment. So that's basically it. That are rather small features, but I think they are all very, very useful, and you can go check them out right now. Okay, thanks for watching, and Well, if you've got questions, email them to Ivercy support. Just go to our website. There's the email address. And yeah, thank you very much for your interest. Bye-bye.